and now we shall also open the screen sharing of the play frame, so to speak. But so what I thought here, like essentially what's in the frame matters. This text outside doesn't really matter. It was just traveling with the picture. But I can simply explain to you what was at play. Of course, what's on the left, this is kind of like a set of potential rules. There's a couple of stylized features. One of them is like things with question mark and italics are things that are possible but don't have to come to play. And it is a meta play, you could say, like, but of course it could be something else as well. But the meta play idea was that to create or select a kind of a scene, but the scene could be almost like in this imagined XORG. And like this is here's the setting option is like a XORG distributed laboratory. What is a distributed XORG laboratory? I don't know. But that can be imagined out. And then the scenes also as option is almost like situations in the distributed laboratory, potentially like a creation of a generator / instrument or creation of a scene template. Of course, could be something else. But then the moves, like of course, first of all, as the last few weeks, the kind of meta move of conversing over the play applies. But then one can always make a move. One of them is the shift move we used earlier, which is like you describe the situation of play forward, like something happens in the laboratory by just one sentence, and then you can add an element which is like anything, like it could be role, object, I don't know, a faction even, like that's left open to play around with the adding. Then there's the query, which is like pose a question upon play, which can be used for many things. Like it's kind of almost like a navigation tool or just something to think about. Then a role is kind of actually player-facing thing. It's like can be thought of as such. Is like if you come up or think of as a role, you might use a role to change how you play the shifts or other questions, etc.
Yeah.
And then there is the save, which is like you could take anything off the play and like frame it or say it out loud, and then you take the responsibility of saving it, which is like you decide how you, like even as a description, you save it somehow. And then there is this idea of like hosts, which is like a host altogether, which is really a little bit like a game master essentially, like but it can be dynamic. That like if we set up a scene, so the person who sets it up can become the host, like, and they are kind of doing the setup in it. And but if we move to another scene, another player could set that scene up and they could become the host of that scene. So it doesn't have to be always the same person. But I was thinking of starting the play of trying to setting up the scene, but I would already play around the rules a bit, that rather than me just doing the setup as taking the host, we could kind of build it together.
Yeah.
And then kind of see what we have and then apply the moves potentially. So any thoughts so far, like to the whole thing? Any questions?
Not really. I like it. Let's do it.
Any ideas towards what kind of scene? Like I put some ideas there, like said, options on the scenes, but like they are just options. Anything else is possible.
I guess I would maybe like to use both. Like they are both the scene, but not necessarily mixed, and they don't necessarily know about each other existence. I know the images, but they are both the scene.
Like these images, yeah, they were
Yes.
actually, I didn't mention, but yeah, I thought like they're just material one could use if one wants to. So the images are both the scenes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both of the images are one scene.
Okay, yes. Or let's see, I'll move this to nearer here just to have a way to record things. Um, uh, and let's put, even for clarity's sake, that they are together are the scene, or input into it. Now that you have that idea, how would you see them being the scene?
Yes. I think they are different perspectives of the same event.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Not sure how they are connected. Maybe I pose that as a query.
yeah, query.
Query, yeah. How
Yeah,
are they connected?
yeah. That's actually why I put the query in, because like, well, one could also make a move called puzzle, and you're now posing a puzzle in a way. Like that might be interesting, but the good thing about query, because I wanted to keep the move list short, is like you can use it for many things, including setting a puzzle.
Yeah.
So now actually you created an interesting, this is already a play situation where we could play solving how are they part of the scene.
Yes.
So, okay, and I could do a, um, almost like a meta shift on this. Like this is also
Mm-hmm.
like testing this, which is that it's a meta shift because it's about how we play it. Um, uh, we could pick one image and work it first and then add another to contour the puzzle in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. If you accept that, which one image you would pick to work first as how it's kind of contributing to the scene.
The left one, the one on the left.
All right.
Yeah.
Um, a bit closer. So I'm, for me, like it it speaks of, I mean, the idea, one of the ideas was distributed laboratory, and it has this sense of being distributed, certainly, like in the nature of it. Like there are these white blocks, and it seems like the white blocks are almost like elementary material, and then they
Mm-hmm.
float around. Not that one has to kind of latch onto that, but it's a possibility. And then there's another quality that the white blocks have growth upon it.
Yeah.
And both of these are interesting possibilities. And also, there is a third, which is among the growth there are trees, and in the left bottom corner, it seems that the trees can grow like branches into the other white blocks,
Yeah, like
like
connecting them.
connecting them. And though I'm posing this all as an optionality, but it's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting range of possibilities that come from there.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me as if it's in the process of getting more connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Uh,
Let me maybe post that as yeah, it's an ad that
yeah,
I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add sort of
could
like
write
this.
it, yes.
Yes, this is a snapshot in
Mm-hmm.
time,
Yeah.
in between where the blocks were not green at all,
Mm-hmm.
and the future where it would become like more of like a rhizome where all of the blocks are connected, and we're at this moment.
Are you writing it somewhere,
No, but
or?
I can do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's good because it kind of grows.
Yes.
Because I have an addition to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can write afterwards. Um, like it also gives this sense then that you can always form a new white block,
Mm-hmm.
which is almost like a platform or basis even. Um, and but if you spend time on that white block, like the process, and the white block can be here metaphoric. It's not that you literally stand on a white block. Um, if you spend time there, which means that there is a process, it starts to grow.
I like that. It's a mechanic, sort of like.
Yeah. It's a mechanic.
Yeah.
And potentially kind of organizational mechanic, or like now we are actually playing this. I could pose as a, maybe even as a question, like, or even an ad. Yeah, I think this is an ad.
I wrote it.
Yes.
Makes it grow, makes the how is it called, flora grow.
I'll put, and this is an ad. We are playing in the structure of the DL, which is the distributed laboratory. And I mean, you kind of made this already with the question, but like that, this becomes like a topic of play is to use this play to develop this into structure, which we're kind of doing.
But I like that ad that you made, because it frames agency of the people inside. Like they have a call in how the distributed laboratory grows with their presence. They like make it. They have that agency. I like that.
I could pose a question, which is I posted here next to the last comment. I'll just get the text. Is that is the Q? Is there a concept / move of gardening? And what I mean by that is, like, there is a way that the growth happens almost by itself. That whenever you like take some starting point or starting basis, which is kind of what we're doing here also, by the way, we're on a white block. When once you start a process on it, it starts to grow almost unavoidably or unavoidably, like, so then is there a concept of or move of gardening? Doesn't have to be called gardening, but by having this meaning that then you tend to the growth.
Yes.
Like you might trim it, you might take parts of it. Maybe I'll add this as trimming, gathering parts of it, like gathering fruit.
I would call that like or maybe an addition, harvesting.
Yeah, like, okay, harvesting. Let's call it harvesting. Harvesting, and then there is planting. And I'm putting them in question marks because then they are like possibilities.
Yeah.
Like in a way, like harvesting could be actually saving as a potential harvesting form.
Potentially a saving mechanic, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'll put this whole into smaller font, just to have this sort of commentary relation. So that's because that's a question. It's almost like a hovering play area. Like one doesn't have to concentrate on it like a full time, but one can always return to it. But one can also develop it further as a way to think about, okay, how the structure works.
I will add to it.
All right, I make some space to it, or
I believe that if spending times in the block inevitably results in growth, then gardening is actually the main task, the main role. It's a form of caring for the growth.
Yeah, makes sense. Like, and it's certainly like whether it's called gardening or not, it has this quality of gardening, nevertheless. Yeah, I would agree. The one thing I could add as a possibility, by the way, is planting trees as connections. Connectors. So, and are you adding yours, or should I add it?
No, I haven't, but I will do. And I have a question for you. Are the blocks moving?
That's a good question. I think potentially, but I don't know how yet.
That's an answer with a query, or with a slot, maybe.
Yeah.
With an open slot.
Yeah, like one could make it as a question: Are they moving? We can also kind of change the moves. In some ways, we're using the shift quite kind of liberally. We don't have to call it the shift, but that's fine, because in a way, like that can work both ways. Are the blocks moving? I put it as a queue. I move this here. And I move this here to give this some space. So yeah, like I think it's definitely possible that they move, but I think somehow the kind of fertility of it is related to kind of the functioning of them. I could actually pose. I think it could be an ad. Is okay. I'll do it as an ad, which is that we are currently on a white block. I mean, metaphorically.
Yes.
Growing upon it. And let's say it allegorically, kind of the same, but maybe slightly more fitting. So, and this is kind of like one way to think about it. One doesn't have to use it, but it's almost like its own topic. It's like one way to think about this is really it's almost like the background is this sort of almost the white block, but maybe that's even too strong to think about that the white block is only the background. The white block is the whole situation. And then and it might be helpful that to use this sense of that this is kind of like being in the laboratory. It might be helpful to develop the laboratory, the gardening, etc. But when it's not helpful, it doesn't have to be used. Like essentially this sort of option. I'll put it as an ad option, meaning that it's
a place you visit.
Yeah, you can visit. Yeah. So yeah, it's one way to play it. Like I also thought, like there is growth, but then there is the specific growth of planting trees, which is towards building connections.
Yes. Yeah, it's a move. It's a very specific move to plant a tree.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually something could be added.
I can add it.
Yeah, because I have a move after that. Like maybe I can start it while you're doing that. It's like because the growing a tree that is growing a connection takes place in a kind of branching manner, that you're growing towards something, and while you're growing towards it, it's going to branch. It's like, oh, it could go this way and that way, and it's potentially allowed to branch, but like, and then following particular branches, it then forms a connection. You know, like you're thinking like, oh, how does this connect to that? And then you start kind of working your way towards it, and then you're like, well, it could go this way or that way. Well, that's a branching point, and like then it forms. But at some point, some branch reaches the other white block. Even multiple branches reach it. So I could add that. Branching paths that open open options of how they could or how they could connect. Yeah, something like this.
I have a question upon the nature of these connections. Are the trees bridges, or like how do you go from block to block? Is it only possible to do that with a tree, or are the tree just connecting the blocks themselves conceptually, but you float around? I guess that's a bunch of questions upon movement and connections.
I can write that from block to block, and then maybe one actually doesn't have to even put the Q in front. One can just make it a question. No, I think like this. This was kind of the idea that we formulate this as we play. Like if some form is better, then just change it on the fly. Like that's I think a good way to kind of mold the mechanics. And so yeah, that only by trees. I think like for me, like probably not only. This I put it as a, I mean it's a shift, but there are other ways.
Yeah,
which I don't know yet, but there is a way to jump to other.
Yes, that is definitely an elephant in the room, sort of like what's up with gravity.
Yeah.
Like it seems to be in the will of the people there. Like they seem to be very much in control of their gravitational situation. But I'm curious, how does that actually work?
Yeah, and actually I add another shift here, which is that trees are not only for travel. For travel, but also cooperation. So in a way, like how operations in one white block kind of feed into the other. I'll actually add the how process of maybe I'll call it growth. Growth of other blocks feeds into others, because this puts the trees in an interesting point that, I mean, trees, I mean, it works kind of literally that trees have veins and they're used to transport, of course, nutrients inside the tree.
Yes.
Then, like, one can think about this in the same manner. That's why I use the word feed. So you're creating kind of like essentially channels that feed the other.
I will add to it. To me, it seems then that trees connect the blocks in a nourishing way. So there's like information sharing between the blocks. To the expense, or on the other hand, the blocks become interconnected in a way that their individual movement is now intertwined and therefore restricted. So it seems like a very important decision to connect the blocks.
Yeah, that's
not to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
I will add that.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I have an addition to it, but write your own, like an ad underneath it. It's that there is a way to cut the trees, but it's a very specific act of cutting the trees. Yeah, it's an interesting form of forming an organizational structure, which we are kind of doing. Like, I mean, it's in a way almost like a camera lens starts from blurry and is sharpening its focus by adding details.
Yeah.
But it's also coming from a very figural sense of things, like in a sense that it's not conceptual. It's not starting. I mean, it's using rules as a process, but the formulation or formation of this is not happening by rules, but it's more happening by adding the details that create behaviors. Because you can kind of see, like, okay, what we've established so far. I make this sort of overview.
Yes.
Which might be a move in itself, but we can do it now as it is. It's like, okay, we have that the white blocks can be formed. It's uncertain how, but like they can be formed and whenever one spends time in a white block, that means that it will grow. Like, it's the nature of the process. And of course, like, one play to here, I'll just make it quickly, is that the style of growth upon block might be contoured, or not controlled, but let's put contoured by rules. I put this as a question because, like, that's what's happening here. Like, this is why I put it here. That it's kind of like coming from thinking of this situation as the white block, is that, and this is actually possibly related to gardening. I'll actually put it without the question, so it's a shift related to gardening, because, like, just like gardening is like planting in a certain spot with certain kind of like grid work or supports. Like here, how this growth is happening here as contoured, not completely controlled, but contoured by the rules here, and it gives a shape to the growth.
I like the notion of contoured because it makes explicit that the tree itself has like its own tendency that you can softly direct, but not completely control, right?
Yeah.
So I like that.
And it's fitting with gardening, because this is true of gardening as well. Like you can put like a guiding, whatever they're called, like a support to a tree, and then or any plant really, and then it most likely starts to grow alongside of that, but you cannot actually control the exact growth of the plant.
And you go ahead.
I'll just one addition, and this is actually very related to the nature of play, because you can use the like and in this kind of play, because the rules are kind of like these guiding spots, that they set these contours, but they don't exactly control the details. They cannot even know them. I put this like clarity between the process of growth in gardens and process of play. Process of play. Yeah, that's. And this is, yeah.
I will maybe pose a question that should not be answered now, because I also want to propose a shift. The question is on the nature of the tendencies of trees, the agencies of trees. Where does it come from? The will of the tree. Is that in any way related to the participants of the distributed laboratory, or is it there's a will of itself? So that's my question. I will write it down.
I think it's a good question, and it also kind of like this is a meta comment of thinking. Like it points out that there is a very useful mechanic for. I mean, here it's useful for questions. Is that they become almost like islands to visit. Like I think it's a good question. I don't, at least right now, have an answer for it, but it's almost like a question that I appreciate that it's floating nearby. So that always like allows this sort of, oh, now I have something towards this question, and it's not necessarily an answer, but kind of a response or material to the question itself. And I think this structural nature is interesting towards play in general. I mean, it's particularly, I mean, it works particularly well in this sort of like text adding to the play, but it can work in other situations as well. Like, and it's a very useful mechanic, so to speak, the floating part of it, like floating at hand, but not like you don't have to play it acutely. You don't have to constrain yourself into that scene only now, but it's like constantly jumpable into that. And I will pose a question. Let me see how to formulate this. Maybe I'll just speak it out loud. So we were talking about the white cubes, jumping between them. What if the floating of the questions is the nature of the white cubes? Like this, what was just described is a nature of setting almost like this question is now a white cube. Maybe the white cubes can be much smaller.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe I'll write the, like maybe the, is the nature of this, let's call it floating thing, question, a white cube, and I call it the white element, and the possibility to jump into it to always jump into it possibility of jumping between elements. let's make it the question. And I put it here, like. It's also interesting how this becomes board gaming.
Yes,
Now,
like the questions are becoming the cubes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's kind of suggesting many interesting formats already. Like
yes.
Like in a way, like what that entails is like thinking of the white cubes in a much more flexible manner. Like it's not just like it's less monolithic. Like, okay, this can be a white cube, but then if you put a question and it's kind of like always visitable, that it's kind of like a white cube of itself. Like it's very kind of just following the principles of modularity in a way, like, but in a very, very flexible manner. And then like this also allows to think like in a way, like white cube can be, I mean, this actually then, this question you made is a white cube that is connected to the white cube of the whole play.
Like maybe this image is the inside of a cube.
I mean, yeah, potentially. Like it's still like structurally this is fine. It's a nesting principle also. Like I'll put this as a question. The white, maybe the cube is still better. Maybe I'll uh, yes, white cube of this question connected to the, let's use white cube of the whole play. So something like this. Of course, it's always possible to even draw arrows or lines, but I mean, kind of resisting it slightly because it takes time, or like just using placing, spacing to create connectivity or relativity.
So I want to propose a shift that does not need to be enacted immediately. We can remain on this type of play, but my proposal for the shift is to figure out the connection between the two images through a game.
Okay, this, yeah. Well, this is like, that's a good move. Like, I'm thinking like it's almost like could be a question. We're kind of using this almost like this puzzle move, but it also could be a scene. Like to think about it, like that it forms its own. Yeah, but like you can put it like scene or a question. We can kind of mold it as we play, right? But it's a good one. I actually make a move towards it while you're writing.
Wow, I felt like two galaxies collided.
Yeah, I have a hint of an idea. I mean, this can be changed, but this is kind of like making a start towards this red color.
Mm.
I'll put that in quotation. In some ways, it's sort of a fairly dry one, but I mean that can be changed. But I think it contains some idea because like it still kind of qualifies as a gene start, not necessarily a ready one, or could work already, which means
Yeah.
that if you get these two images and then like you get like two types of distributed canvases, and I could say even add arrows and point to one of the frames of the painting in the other, which are distributed, and then point to one of the white cubes here, which are also distributed. And then that becomes a puzzle, whoever sees it. And now you're not like your kind of position in front of that would be more player-like, because like it's really kind of almost like a puzzle for you is how are they like both distributed canvases.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess I will make a parallel move, not
mm,
necessarily addressing that, but like adding complexity to it maybe. So
yeah.
maybe this is not the ideal thing to do. But I wanted to do this move for some time now.
Ah, interesting one. Let me zoom in to have.
I can make it.
Yeah, it's this sort of so it's a figure like sitting huddled, and then it has these two yellow eyes, and it's a weird headgear.
Yes.
Um, there's another one which maybe I'll find a way to add it, but or maybe actually now I just introduce play around this. Well, first I make a move to actually take your scene move and place it here. So it's kind of like playing with these, like, or maybe
Yes.
here, because then it's kind of close to these, but also close to these. So, but the move what I was thinking is, yeah, I know how to add it. This is a shift, but shifts can be added without the pre-typing. The this could be normal color because it's a side command. The light, and it's fading in distance, is a factor. How do you do enter without making an enter in this, that you mark the box length on this?
I think shift enter maybe. Try that, no?
Yeah, it's not, yeah, control enter. I don't think shift enter works
Maybe
either.
just a normal enter.
Let's see. It's a factor of this distribution. So, and I'll put this closer to this image. So it's, but once again, actually, this pops up this small puzzle. So now this becomes a puzzle of its own, like a possibility. Also, kind of this island, like it doesn't have to, like maybe it's not played further, and then it doesn't, but like it creates this opportunity, an option of this branching again, of like maybe this distribution, one of the qualities is, because you made this a game master, now this light is colored also differently because the light is near the game master.
Yes.
But then it has this not immediate cutoff but fading that makes the distribution kind of having a distance. Something is closer and something is nearer, farther.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting possibility in itself.
Yeah, it immediately made the power of the game master dynamic, or that's the image it creates in my head, is the game master is closer or has more control of the images closer to the light.
Yeah, Uh, one could add actually. Do I add? Yeah, here, just as a question, maybe is does the game master gather the canvases to be closer?
Mm.
Uh, uh, um, um, something like this. Like this idea is the kind of that the game master forms the light, and then they bring things into light, and that becomes kind of like a scene, but the others are still there, but they're kind of more distance, and that requires the moving of the light. So it's thinking about the distribution as a light, and then the light actually starts to behave. It's different from being in a certain position in a distribution, because if you're in a certain position in a distribution, you're kind of in one canvas, so to speak, using that model. Like now I'm here, and then there might be like in a normal network distribution, then there's lines or edges running between, and that's how you move between them. But the light is more like actually you might be in a certain canvas, and then but then there is a kind of not a perimeter, but some things are immediately closer and much more visible. Some things are farther and they are still semi-visible, and some things are kind of off the light in itself, which is more like always setting areas, fields in a way. Um, uh,
Yeah.
I'll put another question, which is field-based distribution, question mark. Distribution locality, which is an interesting thought as a way of thinking how distribution or different models towards distribution could have.
Yeah. I will add to that that not only my answer is yes, the game master can move the canvases, but also it seems to me that the light is an artificial source of light because it's
Yeah,
inside of this cave. So probably the light moves as well.
yeah,
So game master can move the light around.
yeah. So that gives like two moves to the game master. Is like move the canvases and move the light.
Yes,
And that's a simple but an interesting combination.
I will add that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so that becomes like now if we're playing towards this two types of distributed canvases, I'll actually add to that types or perspectives. And with this moves, I'm saying that maybe they are just two ways of looking at the same thing. So a white cube could be a canvas. Maybe they are, oops, wrong thing. Now I have this one. Um, that, but it could be also like you could shift the perspective and take, say your question or this whole thing and make it move like a canvas now, and then suddenly you have the moves of the game master as kind of in the forefront of and maybe other qualities of this structure in itself.
I will now make a move or no, an add to that last add you made with a line, a couple of lines. What? Okay, where is the line? No.
It's somewhere, it's in
Yeah,
the,
I wanted. It's not letting me do it the way I
There might
want.
be, if you try maybe the drawing.
Yeah, the drawing, that's what I want. Pen. Yes. Oh no, this is too thick. Perfect, okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So now the persons in the canvases in the other are persons on the canvases of the other as well. But yeah, like there comes this sort of but that kind of introduces this possibility of playing around with whoa, it's kind of interesting. This is one of the sort of slightly um, psychedelic moments. Okay, I'll just tell
Yes.
you what I thought. Like,
Tell me.
okay, one possibility is to think that, like in these paintings, there's an interesting quality that I cannot find a single painting where there's more than one person.
Mm-hmm.
That might find later, but it doesn't really matter. But that's what I noticed. So that means that you could say that it's like the canvas that travels with the person itself, like in a way like a uh, uh, in the other, of course, it's not true. Like there's multiple people here. So then there's this possibility of having a personal canvas playing on the other canvas, but then that opens up if they're perspectives, that's an interesting one. Like like it's the possibility there. I don't know if it's a good possibility, but it's an interesting thought that you always have a personal version of the same canvas you're playing with others as a shared canvas.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you have a personal save of the same thing. And like I said, I don't know if that's a good thought, but it's a possible thought that comes
Yes.
from that structure. Hmm. Um, uh, Also, this is sort of forming into um, a gem still, like you could like to make it into a gem or to embellish or further flesh out the gem. You could put like some sentence here, for example, that kind of gives it more of a task or certain questions. But like the material here is like, okay, these are two perspectives or distributed canvases. Uh, and then there are certain things that become almost like potential conditions, like the connections between the persons, and then the game master. Um, in some ways, this light part is almost part of the gem. So we could imagine that actually the picture of the gem would run out of the two pictures and have like a area on the side to
Mm-hmm.
write some text and maybe some other things would be there. But then it's kind of shaping that up as well. Uh, that was sort of a meta move. I could write something about it, but I think it was good to kind of just have an overview of this gem question.
Yeah. I had an idea
Hmm?
to further connect the two images or the two perspectives, because I'm starting to feel they are, I mean, from the beginning, they are the same scene. There are two perspectives on the same um, atmosphere, place. Yeah, two perspectives of the same place, but there are different places. So I don't know how to frame this, but I will add something to the gym.
Hmm.
So the light is a weak gravitational force in the other universe.
Hmm. So
Is how the blocks move, or not the only way they move, but definitely a small influence on how they move.
hmm. Uh, okay, so that would mean You could even add like to specify it as light. You could add a
Yes.
light, uh, so like so,
Yeah.
and it makes it clear. But like that created this thought that okay, now I have to, yeah, create this thought that how was it? So like the things start to move towards the light then, of course. But that means like, okay, what you do is you put the light somewhere and you are able to place certain canvases near it. But
Mm-hmm.
what will start to happen is if something is kind of close by, but not in kind of immediate light, in the semi-light, it starts to move closer
Exactly.
towards, yeah, yeah. And 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 that is a quality of like, first of all, there is a very practical resemblance or resonance with this quality, which is like, let's say you start a process in some area,
Mm-hmm.
you set certain elements to it, but then if you continue that process, then things that are kind of close by are more likely to come into mind. Like, okay, we are not actually addressing this, which was like 2 weeks ago, but actually now that we spent time here, somebody made a comment that, oh, this actually could provide this and this to this. So in a way, like then that kind of resembles this weak gravitational force, that more time you spend in the process, the more likely it is that things that are not immediately brought into the light are still pulling themselves into the light.
Yes. Yeah. It also gives the game master clear but not strong way of influencing the play.
Yeah. So from here, I make a another overview move. Now it became, it could also be called summary move. Maybe I'll actually add here like possibilities, just as a, um, let's put it's still italics for some reason. Uh, it's not bold. Okay, now it's working. Oh, it's every time I go to the uh, beginning of the line, it loses the formatting. It's um, that's
Annoying.
yeah, it's annoying, but at least one can work. Move options, and then I'll put just as a memory summary less overview, just not to forget that that was in play.
Yeah.
Mm. So and won't describe it now, but like, okay, the summary overview is like there's actually so we have several different areas. Like we have this sort of you could say distribution slash nodality or basis of a process, which is on the one hand it's white cubes. In some senses, it's also this canvases here, but then there's like different ways of looking at the process. One, for example, is this like looking at the process itself as growth, and then the rules as gardening, and then the connections as trees, like growing and creating feeding structures, branching feeding structures, um, and that and then this nature of floating, that like this sort of mechanical possibility of creating floating elements, which are like really at hand. Like they don't have to be in focus. That's the thing. Like they don't have to be in focus, but they can always become the focus for a moment and then lose the focus. Mm, so that's one thing. And then we have this new still formation, a way of looking at distribution, which has like a game master, which is almost like the host, and then the possibility of setting up a situation by moving canvases and maybe multiple contents of process potentially, doesn't have to be, they could also be persons, but like just going with one possibility, like multiple context of process, multiple scenes, whatever, and then moving the light, which means like, it can mean this sort of like a focus in a way, like a
Yes.
focus, but in this field-like fashion. It's not focus as one pinpoint, it's focus as an area.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
diffused form of focus.
yeah, yeah. Um, Fused, um, or I'll put it in focus like diffused area, because it's area, but it's not area with a fence around it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a possibility to think about it, like that. Um, so you organize something, and this of course creates a connection between this sort of floating and at hand. Like for example, then you could imagine that the game master is organizing something where people, in some places where people are, where they start from, but then some things are floating at hand, like the question is floating at hand, and they are
Yes.
part of this diffused area. Like here's the questions that are floating, but then they are this like a floating possibility of focus that can be brought into focus at any point. Um, uh, which is an interesting structure I'll take. Like I'm intentionally now kind of reinterpreting and
Mm-hmm.
reconceiving based on those. Um, uh, yeah, that and so or paints an interesting situational picture, I think, or situational structure.
Yes. Would you say this summary that you made is also a save?
Kind of, yeah. Like
Kind of.
yeah, yeah. It could be a save, yeah. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
one could yeah, yeah. I think one, if one would make it, it's a save because it's also like it doesn't take into account everything that has been said and kind of like made its own versions of certain things, like how it played with the light, for example. But
Yes.
it could be taken as a save because it's kind of like, okay, here's one uh, crystallization of it, like um, uh,
Maybe we can give this to others, like
yeah,
for others to watch this video starting from this summary.
yeah, yeah. That could be
A way to
so.
share the save.
Then it would be let's write the save. It could come in parts, like
Mm.
so we could do even multiple text boxes that we can write. Um, let's put just first maybe in bold. Save. Uh, it's called the save something. Um, uh, I mean, it can have a better name later, but I'll call it now crystallization one. Okay, and then one can add to that. Okay, so what was there? Um, there was um, the pros. Let's put like white. Oh no, we're bold. Um, white cubes and canvases as contexts of process. So they're kind of like scenes. That's one point. Let's put that like so. And then there was gardening and rule, gardening as a paradigm of process, not control, but process contouring. Say rules. Let's put an example. Rules are similar to play as I don't know, scaffoldings. Yes, for gardening. Okay. What else? Like duad, if you have something like just then you had like
the game master functions, sort of like them.
Yeah.
Subtly nudging processes in a direction.
Yeah, let's put the game master there. Let's put like able to organize, see its moves. What would be called is the context as a diffused area, like light. Then it's there's actually also, can add to the game master later, but there's also the, what was I thinking, the diffused area, but then there was the, I lost the thought, but I had like yeah, actually now I remember, floating something that is at hand but not in focus as a target of active process, but can be brought into focus at any point. That's the, let's put an example question can be added to at any point.
Yes.
Point. So that's and there was this connection between this and yeah, like the game master. The area could, it doesn't, could the diffused area could be formed out of this out of floating elements.
Yes.
Elements around the, like, let's say the immediate context or the starting context. Text. Maybe I'll put that italics. Oops. So it kind of seems like an option to play around with this formation. Oops, that was a mistake. All right. So that's something like there was more, but that's a start. Um, and then let's put this here.
Seems good.
Yeah, that's a save. Yeah, I think like from there, like there is a like interesting structural notions, and if we think like we were playing the structure of the distributed laboratory, like this is, I mean, it's not to say that this is the structure, but it was an interesting pathway to actually start adding structures, potential structures for it.
Yeah, I
Like,
agree.
like this sort of diffused area, rather than having like just a field, like set field, and or just a location. And then this sort of floating and the behavior of floating in
Yes.
itself is very, very interesting. Um, and both of them could be packaged into the tools, and the tools could potentially exist in distributed laboratory. Not that we have to call the thing distributed laboratory, but it was kind of playing towards what is a kind of potential laboratory state. And in some ways, we're now um, at the kind of end of the play, having like populated this idea somewhat. Like it's not like ready, but that's not even necessary. It can be like this sort of method of populating it. But also the route towards it was very interesting because it came from very different routes than you would have from normally. And that also probably led to such, let's say, unconventional ideas, like uh, like many of the ideas were kind of, yeah, like surprising, partly because they were using this sort of both figurality and then this kind of making these moves and then kind of putting them in relation, which kind of ended up probably with different structures that if you would have just talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very nice session, I would say.
Yeah, and yeah, like some proof in the pudding of towards this kind of particular direction of also formulating something
Yeah.
in a precisely out of the box unconventional manners, like formulating, uh, which is an interesting thing. Like it's something that a game structure can provide, this sort of out of the box approach by setting the rules to be unconventional, the situation, but then like the possibility of using that to get unconventional results is of course a very interesting bridge in itself.
Yes. Especially if you are consciously jumping into the meta,
Mhm.
like that allows for that unconvention to arise more organically, I would say.
Yeah, and we were clearly playstorming. That is like that was the idea as well. Like we had some starting moves, but it wasn't like we have to follow them religiously. But new moves can be formulated, and we kind of change how the moves a little bit work and how they type
Yeah.
down. But that was kind of in the idea anyway. Like, but they kind of did their service, which was they kind of started the situation, like the like and kind of mutated, developed along the way. But also like the fact that there was the move of saving was probably the reason you came like with this endpoint of let's make a save.
Yes.
If it wasn't written there, that probably wouldn't have entered, and then that created this interesting actually play of the save in itself.
Yeah, the save becomes a play element because
Yeah,
it's not yet defined. So you
yeah.
play it.
Like originally, I had the token there. The token we used like point
Ah,
a thing of value, but then I decided to change it to save and not leave the token because then that would force the save to be more present because I
yeah.
thought the save would behave differently, and it did,
Mm.
which is interesting in itself. But yeah, I think yeah, I think really promising, and it's we are kind of now using these techniques that we've been developing
Yes.
like lately, and of course this is certainly not the only way to use them, but there's clearly kind of learnings from the past few weeks, like which are making this also very light.
Yeah.
Uh, there is still like clearly kind of scene like things that play. We didn't play with the role, but we could have. It's not like it's doesn't have to be there, but it's a possibility. But and like all these other things, but like yeah, like using them is kind of very uh, yeah. There is this lightness which is very promising because it makes it easier to play and easier to start and all of these things.
Yes.
And even the jeeps were up, which was positive. Um, all right, hey, thanks. And the one thing, I'll actually stop the recording.
Yep.
Once I find the controls and press there and say goodbye.